All right, comrades, you are all welcome to today's SWL symposium, and in which we would look at a number of, there are 3 sessions. This is the first session, and the first session looks at the international situation, looking at the global economic and political crisis, so the title most specifically is explicitly Global Economic Crisis, Right-Wing Populism and Emancipatory Struggles. As you all know, the world has been in a deep economic crisis, not caused by COVID as some would want us to believe, but exacerbated definitely by the pandemic. And you have seen the rise of right-wing parties, movements, or the deepening or strengthening of some of these in different parts of the world. But you have also seen emancipatory struggles. I want to also listen and learn from this. And we'll be having the lead of presentation by Comrade Idriko. The whole session will last some 1.5 hours. So max. So we're looking at about 20 minutes max lead off, then questions and answers, and I will take it from there. So without much ado, Idris, it's a pleasure to ask you to take the floor. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Babaye, for that brief primer on the state of the global economy, and basically alluding to the fact that this is something of an internal crisis that capitalism perennially struggles with. I appreciate being invited to give this talk today. However, I do have a few disclaimers to put forward, just so that we are on the same page. The first is that I am by no means an expert on this subject. I am merely a student of great minds, and I do my own reading every now and then. But full disclosure, I am a physicist by profession, and but I call that my my hobby job. My actual job is in organizing, which is what I do at night and when I'm not working. So I invite you to kindly scrutinize the things I say with honest brutality, because I may not be right in all the things I say. So just bear that in mind. The second disclaimer I have to put forward is that for talks like this, I usually like to present them in the form of PowerPoint slides, because it helps me to organize my thoughts. It also helps with proper engagements, because we can both hear and see, and I feel like that helps retain things better. However, because of the turbulence of the last couple of weeks and days, I just haven't had enough time to prepare PowerPoint slides. So I urge you to bear with me if my talk comes across as a little bit disorganized. So having now put those disclaimers aside, let us start. I have been called upon to talk on the global economic crisis right-wing populism and emancipatory struggles. So we will approach these, I'll try and approach this systematically by trying to link all of these things to each other, one at a time. But before then, I want to begin from an insight that I gained while reading a book titled Bullshit Jobs, a Theory. It's written by David Graeber. Full disclosure, David Graeber he comes from an anarchist tradition, but he was also an economic anthropologist. So much of his work provides incredible insights into the history of economy, the economic trends of societies around the world, which is grounded in evidence. So in the insight he provided, he tried to formulate the working class, to reformulate it as the caring class. And he did this in order to expand the emancipatory potential of this group of people. I will just leave that thought hanging for now in our minds, and we will come back to it later. But for now, let us address the first part of this talk, that is the global economic crisis. So what is the global economic crisis? We've all seen what is happening. Babayi has already pointed to the fact that it's something that was already existing and was only exacerbated by the COVID crisis, but it's also, it's been happening for even close to a century now, right? Like it's something that started since the 1920s and it's only gotten worse. So today, it is taken for granted, even by the most ardent neoliberal or classical economists, that there is some sort of boom-bust system that takes place within capitalism. They take it for granted, and while they see it as, oh, something to manage, because ultimately capitalism is still the end all and be all of a functional society, and we all have to stick with it. It was not always so. Classical economists did not always see the crisis in capitalism per se. They, up until the late 1920s, things seemed to be going great for them. There was a lot of economic booming in America. Of course, you had the capitalist wars, that intertribal wars that happened in Europe in the early 19th century, which was basically them fighting over territory. But in general, there was this sense that, oh, as long as we stick to the fundamentals of the market, like we will continue to do great and things would only get better and better. The event that shattered that illusion, I think, was the Great Depression that happened in that period, around the late 1920s. So that Great Depression really crushed the confidence of the global, of the capitalist neoliberal economists. But this is something that had been predicted to happen, even long before then. It's just that they didn't want to engage thoroughly with that prediction. And so maybe the first question for us would be to explore the origins of their belief, why they had so much faith, because faith is what we can how we can characterize their disposition. It was not grounded in any kind of evidence, any kind of study whatsoever. It was, in fact, grounded in the works of a moral philosopher who was practicing in Glasgow in the 18th century, none other than Adam Smith. And Adam Smith basically was he's the father of this discipline that we call, economics at the moment. And he didn't necessarily, work to create it, but he did popularize some myths, some lies, which, let's be fair to him, it's not that he was deliberately trying to lie or anything. It's just that he was a philosopher, and the way philosophers operate in those days was to sort of, think up scenarios and then expand on those based on their thoughts and all that. At no point whatsoever did Adam Smith ever think to himself or, thought it important to engage with facts, with reality, with evidence. There was simply no need for that. He was philosophizing. And some of the myths that he came up with, we are very well familiar with them. In fact, much of the world, it's so funny, much of the world has come to adopt them as facts, as reality. So, for example, the idea that, money came about in order to solve a problem of barter, of trade by barter, that only came to surface when societies grew, and there was this notion that sometimes we don't have coincidence of wants, right? And so you have to look for a different way to exchange things. But otherwise, society was always organized based on this trade by barter system. It's a monumental myth. There has so far been not a single evidence that was actually the way that any society was organized. Doesn't mean that there were no societies organized that way, but even if there were, it just wasn't a general thing for societies to be organized that way. More realistically, societies were organized based on a sort of primitive notion of debts, of I owe you, you today, if I need something, I'll come get it from you. And then tomorrow, if you need something else that I have, you can come get it from me. And this makes much more sense, even in if you think about how our own societies are organized, right? The way we interact and exchange things with each other. So there was that myth. Then there was the myth of people's self-interest being some kind of overarching organizing factor for social interactions, right? For the whole economy. So you don't need to want to do good or to to be helpful to society. All you just need is your own self-interest. And everyone having a self-interest would then be compelled through their own self-interest to make something that others would find interesting, so that you can now exchange, and then somehow society would be organized that way, and the rest of it would just be the invisible hand of the market, deciding what society should, what each self-interested person should make. So that the famous example he gave of the butcher, not really caring about whatever the needs of the person who wants to eat the meat or whatever, or but just doing it because that person needs it, or vice versa, right? And so, like, that's the way that society organizes, and then you have this really self-perpetuating system that cannot be broken. It cannot fail, because everyone is always self-interested. And the inherent assumption in that myth is that people are somehow rational decision makers that always make the most rational decision in their own interest all the time, and like they're absolutely invested in in basically keeping that system rolling. So he created this mythical creature that we can today refer to as Homo economicus, who is a rational being who basically makes no mistake in their affairs in life. So these were the founding myths of the discipline economics. And so a lot of the classical economists, they ran away with that and took it as gospel. And the analogy to gospel is fitting, because much of the work Adam Smith did are not things he made up himself, right? These are things he learned. Some of it he took from, for example, the example of barter is something he borrowed from ancient philosophers like Aristotle, who lived sometime around 300 BC. A lot of his work actually also came from Islamic scholars, scholars from the Middle East, surprisingly. The famous example he gave of a needle the factory, needle factory, people organizing around the needle factory to create more needles that people need. That example that example of the hand of God, in fact, like the invisible hand deciding how the economy should be organized. It came from an example of an Islamic scholar from long before him, who gave the exact, like literally the same example, but instead of the invisible hand, that scholar used the hand of God. Would decide how things would go, right? So you can even see that there's a direct theological connection between the founding myths of economics and theology and religion. So when I make that analogy, it's not made lightly, that it has a very religious foundation. And so many of the classical economists took that religion and like it became a thing, and then they grabbed that religion in a lot of, they masked it in a lot of mathematical formulas and gave it this air of scientific legitimacy. And so it seemed like once you have formulas and stuff, you can't go wrong. This is empirical. proof that everything was would be okay until the late 1920s. But what else was happening in the times of Adam Smith that wasn't talked about in his work? True enough, Europe was experiencing, a burst of prosperity and a lot of industrial growth. It's called the Industrial Revolution period. But what was happening? There was a lot that was happening in the background, mostly outside of Europe, that was not talked about, right? There was misery that was being visited on populations around the world, in the Americas, in Asia, in Africa, right? Slavery was happening in that same time. Genocide was happening. People were being conquered and colonized. Their histories were being destroyed. Also, that a global network, a market can be created that would bring prosperity to Europe. So what all those economics numbers, what those formulas of growth, of prosperity, of whatever, what they were masking was incredible violence and incredible, despicable amounts of misery that was being exported to other parts of the world. And this is like the genesis of that prosperity that we're talking about, right? So the economic crisis of the 1920s brought all of the confidence to a halt, and then that birthed a new type of way of thinking. Maybe capitalism is still great, but we have to manage these types of crises when they arise. So that birthed the Keynesian system of economics, of thinking, of managing, creating welfare here and there, and giving workers, making workers basically a little bit more comfortable so that we can sort of stave off the type of revolts that would otherwise have happened in the time, which indeed did happen in some parts of Europe, right? One thing they neoliberal capitalists have really not been willing to come to terms with is that this crisis is intrinsic to capitalism. It's part of it. It is part of the fabric of this system, and this is an insight that was pointed out in the late 19th century by Karl Marx and Engels. Back then, I think the significant points that these revolutionary scholars brought into the discussion are two. There are two that we can really hone on. The first is that there's an internal contradiction that comes from capitalism, from its tendency to alienate the worker from their labor, essentially trying to dehumanize the worker, right, and make the worker a cog in a machine. So that is the first kind of internal contradiction, is that it wants to dehumanize the worker and make them some sort of machine in a part of the machine that's always generating profit, money for societies. That's one contradiction, and we will expand on that. The second is that there is a tendency for profit to continue to decline up until the point where the rate of profit declines until the point where the capitalism grinds to a halt, right? So the production cannot happen anymore because there's nothing that there's the sole motivation of this system is to create profit. And if profit goes, then what good is it then, right? These two contradictions, Marxist scholars discuss them as separate things, but they're not necessarily different. They're actually interlinked. And I will try as much as possible to like make that link. So in the first case, right, in the alienation of workers, when you think about how these systems are organized, when you look at a process of production, there's a few things that come into play. So first of all, you need raw materials to produce. You need things from nature. You need capital as well to produce, and you need labor. You need labor to produce as well. Now, it's not possible to really control the availability of raw materials as such, right? You can maybe every century or something, you discover new raw materials that may be useful for a new way of doing things, but we can't like replenish or like control their availability that much. We don't have that capacity, the kind of energy that's required to do that. So they're just there, raw materials. They're there. They're also like, because of the absurdity of nation states, they're also somehow distributed into territories that are controlled by specific groups, societies, nations, and whatnot. And then you have also capital, and the idea of capitalism is that capital is meant to make more capital, right? And that capital is needed for a number of things, right? For operation of the process of production, like the factories, whatever, the paying of workers and all. So again, when it comes to operation of the factories, let's say you have machineries that do that produce shoes or whatever. Those machineries, they have like a frequent maintenance routine, which you can't really, again, you don't have that much control over. Yes, maybe once every decade, you can come with a much more efficient machine that does, instead of 20 shoes per hour, it does 40 or 60. So like that happens, but it's not something that happens so frequently that a capitalist can use that to like extract their profits immediately. And then the third thing is labor. So labor comes in, and labor is the one thing that takes these, the raw materials, that takes the machinery, that takes the capital, and then, ruffles them together, and voila, a magical thing has been created that is of use, value to us. And so, we take all of that and we run away with it and say, oh, we've created something great. But this labor is you and I, right? We are the ones who do that work. So because those other things that I mentioned are not easily controllable, labor, the capitalist focuses on labor, right? Their goal is to ensure that profit continues to be made by depressing and suppressing what is due to labor. So this is where that exploitation comes from, right? This the idea of exploitation, that they have to somehow keep clawing out of labor what labor produces. All right. So then this leads to the second contradiction of the dwindling profits, right? Because at some point you start to overproduce. You start to overproduce because you're clawing out of labor. You're taking you want to keep making more and more and more. And then when you get to that point, you make so many things that it's almost impossible to like continue to make profit. And no, because again, the labor that works with you has been depressed, has been exploited. They can't even afford to, buy the things that you're making, and so on and so forth. And then boom, everything comes crashing on its head. There's a very simplistic kind of presentation, but like this is like an idea of how that process happens, right? So when this happens, of course, humans are humans, and we have a need to survive. We are hardwired to want to survive. So labor wants to claw back, it wants to take back what is its own thing, right? And so it fights. And then this leads us to the second part of the talk, because the capitalists then freak out. And when they freak out, they start to create a system of, they look for ways to want to like suppress labor, to want to continue to extract, right? And then this is what leads to the rise of right-wing populism, because when labor decides that it wants to fight back, the labor can easily overwhelm the capitalists. It's not that hard. So how does the capitalist maintain its hold? By creating new divisions, by brutalizing labor creating divisions within labor, brutalizing labor, and ensuring that labor continues to function, but with minimal access to the resources that labor creates. And this leads to a point where you have you have a lot of violence as a result coming into play. So the capitalist wants to suppress and that. And so it's easy for them to look for willing accomplices within society. And so you see the rise of right-wing populists who are very well funded by the capitalists, who are able to channel and like present the flaws, right? They're able to a lot of times accurately articulate the problems that most of the workers are facing, but then they're very coyly, cleverly wrap that with the most atrocious, wickedest solutions, right? Like, oh, there's a problem, people are poor, but the reason you're poor is because they are immigrant workers. But the reason you're poor is because there are Jews who are keeping all your money. The reason you're poor is, so they look for a way to channel that anger to other sections of the working class, so that instead of fighting them, the working class focuses on itself and fights itself. And then they're easily able to continue to exercise control on the working class. So that's how this right-wing populism emerges. So I said that they can be easily, they very easily diagnose the problems, right? And this is not a lie. Like if you look at, for example, the recent prime minister of of Italy, or is it the president? I don't know the position. When she came in, she's a fascist, a well-known fascist. And she came in and she gave a brilliant speech about, forgive me for calling it brilliant, about how France is an exploiter of Africans and it's a neo-colonial entity, blah, blah, blah. She gave all that. And a lot of people were excited sharing that same speech, you know, many Africans especially. Oh, look, finally someone is saying the truth. I mean, the diagnosis was correct, but was Italy not part of this colonial enterprise? I mean, the only difference between Italy and France is that Italy failed spectacularly at colonizing, but it tried. It's not for the lack of trying. Did Italy not come into Libya and bomb them so that they could continue to control Libya's oil? Like, why are we suddenly, forgetting that historical context of it? So, and this is where I want to caution us as well, because I hear often the Nigerian like a lot of Nigerians, a lot of Africans say things like, "Oh, we're just so bad. We can't govern ourselves properly. We can't do this. We can't do that." But just as the capitalist class in Europe can very easily find accomplices in their societies to continue to perpetuate, the violence of capitalism through right-wing ideology, they do that in Africa very easily as well. So these people that we have as our leaders are part of the whole, they're part of the pipe, the thread of neocolonialism, of imperialism, of the capitalist class, right? And their job is to ensure that the capitalists continue to extract freely from us while we suffer, while our children work in mines, work in sweats, shops, while work as slaves on coal fields. These are all real things that happen, in our societies. Who benefits from this? Qui bono, right? As the question goes. It's not us. It's not those children. It's basically it's Cadbury, right? The capitalists that are scattered around the world. It's Total. It's Shell Energies, right? And we have our neo-colonial puppets who get a cut from that, but they're not like they're there as a kind of continuation of that colonialism, neo-colonialism that's been happening. So I just want to quickly transition into the final bit. Remember, I asked you to hold the thought of the caring class and why it is important. Now, we often characterize the rising or the resistance that comes from capitalist exploitation as the rise of the working class, people, workers of the world unite. This is not really an accident. It's something that happened in history that caused this. Now, when someone talks about the working class, what is the image that comes to our minds? To me, in my mind, I know that the image is that of some worker, probably a man, who is wearing overalls and putting on a safety helmet and whatever. Very, very intense human being. I think it may not be everyone's idea of the working class, but it's a fairly common image. As a proof, this is a recent review from my party that I received. I don't know if you can see that picture clearly, but it's showing factory workers, and you can see exactly what I described, of just men working in some factory and doing factory work, basically. So that's the image we all have in mind. And David Graeber, in his book Bullshit Jobs, he suggested that that was one slight flaw in the development of the working class emancipatory movement, because it severely restricted how we perceive who the working class is. Now, and historically, when factories started to be started to emerge, it wasn't actually men who were working in factories. It was in fact women and children, because the factory owners saw these groups of people as being easily malleable, easily controllable. So that's why, you know, that happened. So much of the revolt that was happening during the time of Napoleon, where a group of people who we now call the Luddites came in, much of that revolt came because men were beginning to see the people who were traditionally their underlings, the people that they looked after, becoming the breadwinners of society, becoming, you know, the ones bringing, you know, the bread and butter home. And that revolt happened at the time, the Luddite revolts. The results of that revolt, what happened afterwards, was that, okay, there was this tacit agreement that men would start to be admitted into factories. And so, you know, that is where that image comes from, of, you know, the factory worker being a man and all that. But if you look at the bigger trend of history, you'll find that these people do not even make up like maybe 3%, 4% of the working class. Like much of the work that is done in society is like, you know, the work of reproduction, the work of bringing up, you know, the family, the domestic work, caring work. In fact, there is kind of an inverse relationship between how important and how relevant the work is to society versus how much it is recognized and even rewarded or acknowledged. So the people who do the most are not recognized as such. And so this notion of caring, you know, the carers, the caring people, not, you know, not getting enough recognition, is baked into this conception of the working class. And that is why Graeber tried to reformulate this as the caring class. You'll find that, in fact, much of the work that we can categorize as working class is caring jobs, that people, that women, that we usually associate with women, even if it's men that's doing them. So these are like, you know, domestic works, you know, people working in kitchens, people looking after children, people, all these sort of works. And these are by far the majority of the people that are present within the working class. And he gave this fantastic example of when some rail workers in London went on strike once, and you know, a lot of people were debating whether they're actually useful, because these were not the whole cohort of rail workers, but these were the ticketing officers. And people were like, oh, they're not useful because we can easily get our tickets online. We can buy our tickets from machines. What is the use of these people? So those people, when they went on strike, they put out an editorial advising Londoners. They said, and it goes, "Dear Londoners, as you may be aware, we're now on strike, so we're just going to advise you to familiarize yourselves with all the 60 stations and 270 stops to make sure that you are not disabled, to make sure that you do not arrive, your train does not arrive late, to make sure that your child doesn't go missing in the station. So like you can sort of see that the work these people do, the actual work that means something, it's not even what they're recognized for. So it's very easy to dismiss them as useless when we're not really putting into full perspective what they do. So when it comes to emancipatory movements, I think it is important for us to reconceptualize how we view things, and how we view the worker, how we view the people who should emancipate themselves. And there is already a lot of work that has been done in this regard, from feminist movements, a lot of liberatory work that's been done from people who are simply from farmers, from bus drivers, all sorts of other works that do not involve being in factory at all. We should take some, we should be take the lessons and at the same time find inspirations in these types of movements, especially amongst us. A lot of work is being done even within our country right now in Nigeria, on the left side, despite our limited resources, to ensure that this is the case. We still have a long way to go. So I will stop here, comrades, so that I don't take much more time, but thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you so much. I must commend the speaker. He did speak for 47 minutes, but I dare say every single minute of that was worthwhile. And in response to his first disclaimer, let me say that, well, it's being a physicist, you are in very good company with what's his name, Albert Einstein. I wouldn't want to do much of trying to summarize the brilliant presentation. I want to throw the floor open for some 45 minutes of discussion. But first, I want to, not in summarize, just to add a bit of some pieces to it in looking at the issue of depression. I particularly liked how Idris went into the nuts and bolts of it, of the central place of the decline in the rate of profit, as informing how and when capitalists produce, and how this is pivotal to the cycle of booms and busts. What I'll then also say, and he also pointed that, it's something that has been inherent with capitalism. What I want to stress is how this has evolved, sharpened over the while. It could arguably be said that the first depression was in the 1830s and 1840s. Then before the Great Depression, some will say probably the longest, in fact, it's called the Long Depression. This was between 1879 and the 1890s, I think 1895 or 96. And then the Great Depression from 1929 till the 30s, and then ended in the World War. And after that, there was the economic crisis of the early 1970s, which was triggered by the energy shock. And then the 2007 to 2009 Great Recession, where, Lehman Banks collapsed and all that, was the greatest it steered what has been the greatest depression since the Great Depression of the 1930s, the worst. Now, what are the differences in this, and how has things gotten from bad to worse to terrible, and so on and so forth? First, when we look at the earlier recessions and depressions, and just to clarify, recessions are sharp. Recessions, I would say recession is like a sharp uppercut. Production, declines because profit is falling and all that. But depressions are more long-lasting, take more years. Unemployment and all that. So the earlier ones were before capitalism had always been global in essence, but it became more manifestly global in the 19th century, in the sense of also, at the very least, formal sovereignty of states in the global South. Because how capitalists resolve each crisis, they either have two things. There are socialists that think that all we need is crisis, all we need is crisis. No. Each crisis is either capitalism can be defeated, or capitalists will find a way out of it somehow. And the kind of way they find out of it is determined by the balance of forces. It was the crisis of the 1920s contributed significantly to the socialist revolution in Russia, because, and this is the important thing, there was the subjective factor in revolutions is a revolutionary party, with a critical mass and deep roots in the working class people, and which has been able to, even before the period of crisis, establish credible counter-hegemonic presence in the social imaginary. Without this, what happens without this, you can't have revolution. You could have, you could even have revolutionary situations. Like we have seen what happened in Sri Lanka. The government was kicked out and all that, which is a good thing. Sri Lanka at that time had probably the highest revenue to debt to revenue ratio, which Nigeria has overtaken. But okay, kicked out the government. What next? So without revolutionary alternative, you cannot seize the working class people cannot seize power. However, and this is also important, and this is where the issue of the right-wing populism comes in. Right-wing populism, it's not only anti the left, it feeds on the weaknesses of the left. When I say weaknesses, ideological, organizational, and political. For example, the rise of fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany. A lot of people forget that Mussolini was even initially, he started off as a member of the Italian Socialist Party, but weaknesses and especially in terms of utilizing United Front tactics on the part of the socialists, we play into the hands of the right wing. And that is also what you see in Germany, where probably if the communists had forged ranks with the Social Democrats, Hitler could have been kept at bay, but it was like, no, the Social Democrats are just social fascists. And so the need for us as revolutionaries to be able to, in a non-sectarian manner, build united fronts with left reformists without in any way hiding our banner from the working class is also an important part of starving off a right-wing populism. A right-wing populism takes different forms in different periods in history and in different countries. It can even creep in through, separatist politics. You see, for example, the Eastern Security Network. The IPOBs argument for self-determination is something that, as Marxists, we cannot say is in any way misplaced. But the role of the work of what the Eastern Security Network is doing is neo-fascistic. And fascism has to do also because at times comrades just call every popular right-wing movement or force as fascist. This is not correct. Fascism has to also do with building and having extra parliamentary force. You see, the Nazis had the stormtroopers, the brown shirts, the Italian fascists had, the black shirts and things like that. So, and you see that now people talk of post-fascism. Then the fascists, even though they have gotten into power historically, through elections, Hitler and then Hitler, they didn't. Mussolini first seized power. They do Shaka, but eventually they used parliamentary system to solidify their. But now you have parties like the current one in Italy, like Bolsonaro, that they don't necessarily have the kind of extra parliamentary militias. And they at least formally subscribe to the parliamentary system in all sense of the word, but they still eschew some of the key values, race, blood and soil, and anti-immigration and all that classical fascists upheld. In Africa also you see things like the Dudula movement in South Africa, which is anti-immigrants, and the main immigrants it targets are blacks. So you might not in the classical sense describe that as as racist, but it's like 6.5 dozen. So these are elements that you run through, but the current one, and because the question of what is to be done always has to be uppermost. Right now, in the wake of the COVID-19, there is severe attacks on working class people. Not in the wake, we are actually still in it, but gradually the world is crawling out of that crisis. Already, in like 191 countries, austerity measures have either been put in place or there are programs for putting austerity measures in place. The thing, however, and this is also where emancipatory struggles comes in, is that oppression, exploitation tends to birth resistance, but the shape resistance takes is informed by the history of ideological debate, discourse within the working class people. It's determined by the level of organization as alternative, the level of entrenchedness of revolutionary politics or otherwise. So you see, I gave the example of Sri Lanka. You also saw in Chile, and the thing is, it's fluid, it's dynamic. We saw how in Chile, the Boric came to, the Communist Party on the platform, the United Front platform. But just shortly after that, the constitution that this platform pushed forward was voted against. How? Because the right wing keep fighting. Using social media and all that too. So as I said, I wanted to be brief, so I won't go beyond that more than to at this point say we are living through very critical situations in which global economic crises have become not only much more and clearly so global in every sense of the word, but also sharper and more recurrent and longer. That's why Michael Roberts, after the Great Recession of 2007 to 2007, we went to a very long depression. And it is also now not just economic, but also economic and ecological crisis. So yeah, I'll shut up here. Comrades, please, questions, particularly for the speaker, but also for us generally to discuss would be very much welcome, and also contributions. The floor is open, comrades. Could we see hands? Don't be shy. Comrades in the seeker space too, welcome to raise questions. Okay, Shola, Joel, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. My intervention is just to make a question that needs to be addressed. I really enjoyed the session. He has really analyzed a lot of things as per the economics of the capitalist. In view of the global phenomena, what we are seeing around the world, the right-wing prime minister that came in Italy, the election of Brazil, which is highly competitive between the incumbents and Bolsonaro, and a lot of sort of coercion within the European Union against the Eastern countries like Ukraine and Russia, intervention by the EU. I want us to bring it to practicality. This issue of the trend, the direction in which the current situation is moving towards, it's like capitalism as I would not agree that they don't want to agree that the system is failing. They know. They have always embraced reforms here and there in order to patch up the system and everything. They know the system cannot be better. It's just like the situation in Nigeria too, which is local. When people are benefiting from the system, they want to perpetrate it. And Marx, always said that part in history. Those who are the ruling hegemony of any system, they want to maintain that dominance. And that is what is happening throughout the world. Despite the triumph of capitalism in some years, in some eras, it has witnessed more catastrophe around the world, in every dimension, including climate, including health, including a lot of things that could have been easily avoided under the new socialism, But now, it's like the imperialist country, which are being represented by the United States of America. They are taking the country one by one, in order to lead the world into more crisis, that is going to be unequal in history, because every country that they are ready to sponsor to make sure they beef up their defense, even including Nigeria. As the situation is very bad, the budget of defense will be very high in every country. They buy weapons and everything, and we don't really, when we talk of welfare of the common people, they are not ready to shift ground because of welfare, So, are we even having it? The trend, despite the movement, the mass movement that is countering it everywhere, Of course, Baba said that, yes, they are amparing on the weakness of the left, to really organize and take over, from these forces. But then, even in the Soviet, even in Cuba, even in some of the so-called socialist or Stalinist countries, they have been able even though both of them, the dimension they are being focused, on like what we are having. If Iran now, for instance, is supporting another imperialist like Russia, it's just because of the selfish interest that they have. It's not because they want the world to return from retrogression to progress. So I want us to really analyze to bring what we have discussed theoretically in practicality to what is the current trend. Thank you.
Yeah, Ijiko, I hope you got that, but we'll take the 2 more hands and then you can take questions together. KB followed by Kevinci.
Okay, hello, comrades.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear, comrade.
Well, Babaye took the floor. He did mention something concerning the Russia-Ukraine war, and that's the angle from which I'd like to just contribute now. I'd like comrades to note that the war, if intensified, can kind of cause some sort of fragmentation of trade and investments across the world. So what we should be looking at now is how can the League, the Socialist Workers and Youth League, come in, how can we intervene in this war? Ordinarily, we should be sending our members, in solidarity. What I mean, I won't even subscribe to that. However, donations can be made, maybe to the Red Cross Society or something. We could even have some sort of hostings for refugees if we can afford it. Because whether we like it or not, I want us to know that both countries of Ukraine and Russia are important bread baskets, bread baskets, I get bigger part for the world. By bread basket, I mean both countries account for about 1/3 of the world's wheat and 1/4 of barley production, which means that for someone like me, my bar business could just get threatened. Yeah, it could sound funny, but if we're not careful, developing countries like Nigeria will also suffer the effects of a prolonged war. It's not enough for us to come together like this when we have symposia, when we have workshops, could be talk shops, and talk about those things. What are we doing about the situation? There is a threat to global food security, whether we like it or not, especially when we consider the shortage of food and, the price hike in fuel and fertilizer. Whether we like it or not, we must farm here. How much of fertilizer do we even produce here? We have to import those things. And where do they come from? In Nigeria today, comrades, we are gradually marching towards starvation. It's a statement of fact. So there is a need also for a true social democratic party to emerge in the 2023 elections. How is the Socialist Workers and Youth League managing, the electioneering period? What have we done so far? What do we plan to do? What are we doing right now? All of these things, whether we like it or not, will come back and have a snowball effect on us and other people. The same working people of Nigeria that we're fighting for, that we're championing their cause to ensure that they have good standard of living, will still suffer it. What is the way forward? Over.
Thanks for that brilliant. There are a number of things loaded in it, some of which speak to the international situation and this current session. There are some that speak specifically more to, like that of food covers both global food shortages and that in Nigeria, which even will be worsened by the floods. But some of the questions speak more specifically also to the next section, the 2023 elections and building revolutionary alternatives. So I think those aspects could be addressed at that session, but I'm sure Idriko has taken notes to speak to the first part of your questions and comments. Now we will be having Kevinci. Kevinci, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Babaye, for that for calling me up. I want to say a very, very big thank you to Comrade for that. I think for that intervention. I think as Baba you mentioned, you are not just a physicist, but at least you shed more light into what we'll be discussing. Yeah, very quickly. For me, I think yeah, you said so much, and I think when Comrade was making his intervention on the topic, you made mention of machines and workers and all of that. I remember very quickly when things were going to evolve. I read in history about Fordism, and I tried to place it bit by bit. So here, assembly line, workers were struggling, and then Fordism came up, and they were expanding. So for me, I feel like the crisis has expanded. A lot of things is coming up, and like Komikebi said, now the food crisis, Ukraine war, all of that, and even in Nigeria, across Africa, you have spike in food commodities. But another dimension is the climate issue, because there's this gimmick they do, and as socialists, we should be very, very key, should be very, very conscious of that. They see a way of transferring some of these crises to the working class. For instance, we have climate, like the COP is coming up now in, I think in Egypt, and then they want to transfer the aggression to workers. And you have NDCs for government, for state. What are we doing as socialists to actually tackle these climate issues that have over time been exacerbated by this global capitalism? And I would just want to pose it to Comrade Idris. What do you think is a way forward for us to actually tackle climate issues that is really taking a new shape? Recently, we had a research on climate change, and one of those e-hailing drivers said, see, this is not even just transition. They are telling us to jet from one place to another without looking at the critical issues. What are the workers doing? How are they marginalized? So for me, I think we need to express it more, deeper, that the workers themselves are the ones who are feeling this brunt. You look at the floods ravaging Nigeria, for instance, from Kogi, even to Lagos. Last 2 weeks, even about your area in Lagos, there was this, this dimension in the flood too. It took life. So for us, what are we going to do to tackle this crisis, this global phenomenon is taking? Because they have been the one amassing wealth. They have been the one taking workers. We should be particular because as working class, workers are our priorities. The working class are our persons. We are with them. So what should we do in addressing these issues? The food shortage, the climate issues. Over. Thank you, Baba.
Thank you for that, Kevinchi, and very good that you very much highlighted the environmental dimensions of the general crisis of capitalism. I'll now call on Comrade Idriko to respond to this round of questions. Over, Comrade.
Thank you very much, comrades, for your robust contributions, commentary, and questions. I would start from the first one from Comrade Esso. He gave a very robust commentary on the discussion, linking it to the global crisis, the ongoing crisis in all around the world. The war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine, and he's asked to maybe ground that discussion more in practicality. So I'll attempt to do just that. I actually especially appreciate how Comrade Esso noted that the current crisis is also, a battle between imperialist countries. I'm horrified, in fact, on my part, when I note that there's a lot of tendencies in the left that are actually somehow rooting for Russia, not in a uncritically, I would say, like, they're fighting the hegemon that is the United States, the greatest hegemon, which is correct. but making Russia out to be this liberator of the world, holy. I find that very horrifying. So I appreciate that you pointed that out. So yes, the crisis and how basically it links to the reality we're in now is links to something which Babaye had already kind of alluded to before, which is how also there is an imbalance of forces that exists that is not adequate enough to provide an alternative view to people. And so it seems like they as a result, because of the the decades old battering and violence that leftist movements have experienced, that experience has kind of significantly diminished our capacity to respond to this situation adequately. And so there is that situation in the background, but we should also not lose sight of some of the hopeful things that are happening around. We can definitely see that there is a kind of there's a growing uptake of the leftist arguments in a lot of places, mostly in the global south. The rise of left-leaning political tendency has been extraordinary over the last couple of years. Just the last 5 years alone, we've seen so much change in Bolivia, in Colombia, even in Brazil, in all these places. And so we shouldn't lose sight of that, and we should look to be consolidating that growth. We've also seen rise of leftist tendencies even in Africa. The rise of the Kenyan Communist Party, for example, or there's the one in Swaziland as well. And even here in Nigeria, like sometimes I get very annoyed, and when I think about where we are as a leftist movement in the country. But I also, when that happens, I also think maybe 2-3 years back, like there is no way the type of discussions that are happening on the streets in Nigeria, that are happening on Twitter, that are happening everywhere, there's no way like that level of awareness was there. Like like I can even see the tendency growing back home. So it's now a question of just organizing it and making it more potent, if you like. And this brings me straight to the second question of how can the SWL intervene in specifically the war that's happening between Ukraine and Russia. And this is an excellent question. And how can we intervene? SWL is a organization that is socialist in its ideologically socialist, and it exists for the specific reason, purpose of organizing the Nigerian left. As far as I know, this is why we are here. So like the most direct answer to that is that we have to strengthen our organizing and and become a potent political force, so that we can actually be able to make more concrete interventions in the foreign scenes, in Nigeria's foreign policies, right? The reason we're not able to do that now is because of how weak the left is, and the government, just basically is reactionary. Although, so we then have to ask ourselves the question, what is the current position of the Nigerian government, right? And what are the aspects that we agree with and that we disagree with? And, part of it is also coming up with the alternative and presenting it. You did mention a need for a social democratic party to emerge in Nigeria. I would even go further and say we do need a socialist party to emerge in Nigeria. And I agree with you without wanting to usurp the discussion from the next session. This is part of what the Socialist Workers League can do, is to work with current leftist parties to strengthen their ideological base, and also then push the work forward. And to the question of Comrade Kavinci, you asked how to tackle the climate issue as workers. Again, the short answer to that is organize, organize, organize. So as workers, like the climate issue affects all of us, right? Even those of us who are not in Nigeria at the moment, it still affects us because we have families in Nigeria. We have houses, we have things. Our roots are there. So like and not just in Nigeria, it's a crisis that has been happening for decades to so many other communities around the world. One of the greatest failures of the climate change movement is their projection of this problem as a future problem. It isn't a future problem. It isn't a 2030 zero emission goal. It isn't a 2050 1.5 degree goal. It's none of that. It has been happening to societies that have found their islands submerged for a long time. And so because of this, it has really alienated us from the global south. Our voices are not heard in these circles. It's usually the voices of people who are extremely privileged, who live a life of niceties, who come out and make the loudest noise and tell us how it's a 2030s problem or 2050s problem, or the COP thing that happens all the time, where they set some targets in the future. It's a present and it's a real problem. Our voices have just been alienated, so we have to look inwardly and pursue the indigenization of society, making it reclaiming ownership by indigenous peoples, giving them all the support. And again, we do not have yet the capacity to counter the violence of the ruling class who just want to perpetuate the status quo. So this kind of proposition, this move to support indigenous communities in reclaiming their lands, their communities, would require us to organize to gain political and political power and the capacity to counter the potential for violence from the ruling class. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Comrade. What I would just want to say, there's a hand up which we'll take now, Jamil, is going further. You said you took KB's call for the emergence of a social democratic party further to the need for a socialist party. I would even say that there is a social democratic party running on in the election, and there is also an eco-socialist revolutionary party. But we'll discuss this more in the next session and the implications of this within the broader scheme of things. Meanwhile, Comrade Jamo, you have the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon, comrades. Yeah, I really love the summation by most of us here, and it was really interesting for us to bring this topic up at this crucial time. In as much as we all agree that there is a global crisis and capitalism is really crashing so fast, and I would also want us to also agree that in terms of gaining the momentum, in terms of the enormous stacks of work that we have put into the struggle in the last 10 years, let me put it that way now, I don't think we are really investing much in terms of what we have put in and what we are getting currently. And I really want to come down to our own nation here and look at things from that perspective. There is an increasing rate at which right-wing movements are going all over the world. And our country is not exception to. I will use two critical examples. I think the last struggle that we have participated in. And I also want us to look at how people are extracting from our work and using it to advance their own interest. And what I will do, I will look into is, let us look at the NSAS movement, for example. We are the real foot on the ground during the NSAS struggle. We're coordinating. But on social media, the momentum is quite different from what is going on the ground. And recently also, let us look at the memorial, the NSAS memorial now. The NSAS United coordinated almost every aspect of that struggle. In fact, when they were saying they want to do motorcade or whatever they want to do, we mobilized to put our foot on the ground. And at the end of the day, when you look at the social media, you will see Mr. Macaroni fast. At times, I tend to look at where our own comrades that put in day and night, this hard work to make sure that these things really became reality. In essence of these things, I want us to take cognizance of the fact that we are in a digital age and we must utilize the social media effectively and efficiently. Otherwise, who will be doing the work? Why some reactionary will be adverting our work just because they have positioned themselves on the social media and things. And you can even see from the obedient movement and noise, it was all coined out from the social media. So we need to get that fact that the social media is very, very important now, and we need to start creating our own influencers so that whatever we do on the ground, on the field, we can also be advertising online. Not that some persons who have not done anything will mobilize, they will just come on the day, using our own mobilization to also express and chase their own clout, and they will go on social media. The whole media will be reporting how Macaroni and the likes and facts were going to NSAS Memorial. Why not talking about the series of meetings we have had at the level of NSAS to make sure the NSAS Memorial became reality? So those are the aspects that I want us to look into. As we are working on the ground, we should make use of this social media. It is something that we cannot ignore at this point in time. It is very, very important. And that is giving rise to all these right-wing movements that you are seeing all over the world. They are being coordinated on social media using influencers. Thank you very much. As you submit.
Thank you very much for that. Most of what Jamo has raised are agreed for discussion in the next session of the meeting. I will respond only to one passing bit there. and which is talking about all those that are not revolutionaries being reactionary. I would advise that there are those that are reactionary and there are those that are reformist. Building United Front efforts would require some collaboration with reformists without revolutionaries in any way surrendering their banners, but categorizing everybody not on the left as reactionaries was the same error that the communists made in Germany, and which paved the way for the emergence of Adolf Hitler and Nazism. So that's just true. But that, of course, as I said, is a passing but important element of what he has said. However, it should be taken into consideration. At this time, I want to thank everybody for your active engagement, including those that have been listening with rapt attention physically on the ground in this hybrid meeting. We'll wrap up this first session of the symposium, and we'll have a 10 minutes health break. Stretch your legs, those of you that can grab a coffee, or if you will, a beer, if it's not too early where you are, do that. We have actually kept exactly within time allotted for this, even though we started behind schedule, meaning that the symposium will spill over a bit, but each of the 4 sessions is supposed to last for an hour and a half, and we have used exactly an hour and a half for this session. I hope we keep within time with the remaining sessions. Those of us that are online, you can stay online. The Zoom room will remain open. It's now 12:25 in Lagos. So a 10 minutes break, health break, means we return by 12:35. Please try make sure that you are here on time. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, comrade.
Workers and youth,
Unite and fight. And as requested by Joel, this is Maberu and the Aluka band playing.